Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Addicted Lawyer, How We Got Here, How to Solve It, presented by Brian Cuban. My name is Stephanie Phelan. I'm a marketing manager at MyCase, and I will be your host today. First, I'd like to give you a few tips about participating on GoToWebinar. The webinar control panel is on the right-hand side of your screen. This is where you can control audio, chat with me, and submit questions. Please use the questions pane to submit your questions throughout the webinar. I'll be collecting those questions and saving them to ask Brian at the end of his presentation, but don't wait until the very end to shoot those over to me. Also note that these slides and the recording will be available by end of day tomorrow on the MyCase blog, and it will also be emailed to all registrants. When you close your webinar today, a 5-question survey will pop up. All you have to do is answer those questions and you'll be entered to win a $100 Apple gift card. The survey only takes about 30 seconds to complete. If you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, the hashtag to use is #AddictedLawyer. This webinar has been approved by the Wyoming State Bar and the Florida Bar for 1 hour of general CLE credit, including 1 hour of substance abuse credit for the Florida Bar. If you are a Florida Bar member, note course number 2490R to self-report your CLE. I'll also send this information out in the GoToWebinar chat pane. Today's webinar is hosted by MyCase, so before we jump into things, I'd like to give a quick overview. MyCase is a web-based law practice management software that takes care of your daily practice requirements for calendaring, contact management, document management and templates, time and billing, client communications, custom workflows, and more in one solution at an affordable price. MyCase is priced for solo and small firms at just $39 a month per attorney and $29 a month per paralegal or support staff. We also offer MyCase websites for our customers. The one-time fee to set up and build your custom website is $9.95. Then there's a $50 per month fee to maintain and update your website. Our websites team makes some beautiful websites, and we can build one for your law firm too. We use a modern professional design built for your firm. The websites contain social media and blog integration, and best of all, a client portal, which is completely integrated with your MyCase software. So now you and your customers can log into MyCase directly from your own website. Next up is payments. Are you accepting payments from clients online yet? You should be, and it's easier than ever. MyCase recently announced the addition of a built-in credit card payments feature to our payment service. MyCase customers can now accept online payments from clients using both credit cards and checking accounts. This is also known as e-check or ACH payments, seamlessly through their MyCase account with no third-party integration required. Last but not least, we enjoy hosting educational events for professionals in the legal industry, and that's why we're all here today. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenter. Brian Cuban is an attorney, author, and activist. Brian has appeared on talk shows such as The Katie Couric Show and has written for numerous media outlets, including CNN.com, FoxNews.com, and the Huffington Post. He also has a weekly column on Above the Law covering the topic of addiction. Brian speaks regularly about his recovery experience and breaking the stigma surrounding addiction and mental illness. I know that there are too many cases of addiction in our legal industry, and this is a topic that must be addressed. I am thankful to you, Brian, for sharing your story today, and I'm going to let you take it over from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie, and it's a pleasure to do my very first webinar on the addiction issues going on within the legal profession. And to start it out, I thought we would talk about how I got there, how I transitioned from being somebody who was deep in both alcohol and drug addiction to somebody in long-term recovery. And I thought I'd start with a story, a little anecdote about what I call the insanity of addiction. I want to take you all back to the year 2006. As you can see from the picture there, my brother Mark Cuban owns the Dallas Mavericks. This picture is actually from when we won the championship in 2011, but I wanted to give you some context. In 2006, we were going to the NBA championship for the very first time. And as you might expect, I had the opportunity to get some pretty good seats for that game. So I was able to get a couple tickets for friends. Do you think I gave those tickets to my friends? No, Maybe you think I traded them, I sold them on eBay for some astronomical amount. Well, I didn't do that either because that would be disrespectful to both my brother and the team. I took those 2 tickets and I traded them to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in cocaine. Selling them on eBay was disrespectful, but trading them to my cocaine dealer at scalpers' prices was perfectly logical in my mind. And it made perfect sense, the insanity of addiction. So my cocaine dealer shows up at my house, he delivered, gives me the 2 tickets, I give him the cocaine. I take the cocaine upstairs and grind it out, and I have this big, huge pile of cocaine staring at me on my desk in my home office. I'm looking at it like I'm Scarface, this huge Scarface pile of cocaine, and I start to panic. I start thinking, wow, this is a lot of cocaine. I could end up in prison. So I put all the cocaine back in the Ziploc baggie. I leave my house and I drive up to Home Depot. At Home Depot, I buy all these electrical outlets, a drill and a saw. I drive back to my house. I go to each closet in each bedroom and I drill a hole and cut a hole in each closet and put a fake electrical outlet in each closet and put a little bit of the cocaine in each fake electrical outlet. I mean, I'm a lawyer. This was brilliant to my lawyer mind. And so I hide it all, like the drug dogs and the DEA and the cops have never thought of that, right? And then I do a little bit of the cocaine. Drugs had long since stopped making me feel good, and I was chasing the high. I felt guilty about what I had done, and I started to panic. What am I going to do with all these drugs? I could get busted. I go back up to each electrical outlet. I take all the cocaine. I put it back in the Ziploc baggie, and I flush it all down the toilet. I didn't flush it all down the toilet because I had an epiphany about addiction. I flushed it all down the toilet because of the paranoia of addiction. That is how addiction had affected my thought process. Game number 2 of the championship. What have I done? I got rid of all my cocaine. Another call to my drug dealer with the thought of the flush of the night before long gone. He shows up at my door again. I give him 2 more tickets. I get the cocaine. Once again, hide it in all the electrical outlets. Do a little. Feel guilty. It had long stopped making me feel good. I go back to each electrical outlet, almost like I could hear the police at my front door, the paranoia. They're about to break through my windows like they did on Christmas Vacation. And I put it all back in the baggie, and I flush it down the toilet again. The insanity of addiction, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. I hear that when Dallas flushes, it ends up in Houston, so I think some people in Houston got really high those 2 nights. Now that's kind of a funny anecdote, and I look back on my life in addiction, and I try to find the humor in it, but it certainly didn't seem humorous at that time as a practicing lawyer and as an addicted lawyer. How did I get that way? That is the young Brian Cuban, growing up in Pittsburgh, PA, about 6 years old, long before I became an addicted lawyer. I was the middle of 3 brothers. Mark, a lot of people know, the Maverick, Shark Tank, blah, blah, blah. I have a younger brother, Jeff. I was the middle child, classic middle child syndrome. I was very shy, very withdrawn. And unfortunately, I also had a difficult relationship with my mother. And I'm not going to tell you about this to blame my mother. Parents don't cause addiction. That's just, there's a saying, genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. This is just one part of my environment. There was a lot of fat shaming in my household. My mom used to come home from selling real estate. This was back in the 70s. And I would be eating Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can, and she would come home and say, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. And now, these were the things her mother said to her, and these are the things my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. this kind of talk, this kind of fat shaming is often generational in families. And you might be saying, what does this have to do with addiction? It has a lot to do with it because it shaped how I viewed my body. It shaped my self-image. And it shaped how I would start to determine how I could view a better person in the mirror. And so as you might imagine, I became kind of depressed. I developed clinical depression as a teenager, and I began to eat more to satisfy this. I became a heavier Brian, and I became a heavier Brian, and then the bullying started at school, is what often happens when kids start to change how they look. And it all culminated one day in what I call the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark had given me these shiny gold satin disco pants that he had. And back then, this was back in the day of Saturday Night Fever. So John Travolta, whoever, if you've seen it and remember that, wore the disco pants. And I loved my brother, and I loved that he gave me these pants. But Mark wasn't a big guy. The pants fit him. The pants were tight on me. My butt looked like 15 cats back there. You got to jump up and down to get them on, spray the water bottle. But I didn't care because I love my brother, and I was going to wear these gold disco pants, bell-bottom, to school. And I did, and the kids made fun of them. One day I'm walking home from school with these kids who were bullies, but I hung around them because I thought that if I hung around them, they would eventually accept me into the group, and I would be one of the popular kids. I'd be one of the kids that get to go to the prom, to finally kiss a girl, to finally go on a date. And these kids decided that these pants looked really funny on me, and they decided to tear them off me a mile from my house. So these kids ripped these gold shiny disco pants that my brother had given me off of my body, tore them into shreds, and threw them in the streets down in my tidy whities. A very embarrassing and traumatic moment. It was so traumatic that I could go to that spot in Pittsburgh, PA, and show you exactly where it happened today. So I go out in the street and I gather up the pieces of my disco pants. I put them over my Fruit of the Loom undies and waddle on home. Very ashamed. Ashamed that, one, I didn't know how to stand up to bullies, and two, it kind of verified everything in my mind that my mom had said to me, that I was a quote-unquote fat pig and a dumb bunny, as she would call me, when I had bad grades. And again, I want to stress, I am not blaming my parents for my addiction. This is just part of the environment that shaped me. There were many other things in the environment as well. And so, every time I started to look in the mirror, I started to see this fat little boy who was never going to be loved, who was never going to go on a date, who was never going to achieve anything in life. And this was as I began my life in college, going to Penn State. And I was developing what is known as body dysmorphic disorder. And what body dysmorphic disorder is when you take a small or non-existent defect in your body and exaggerate it to the point where you're unable to function, quote unquote, normally in life. It is a disorder in the diagnostic manual. It is a DSM-5 disorder. And so this is how I viewed myself going on to Penn State University. And when I got to Penn State University, two things happened. One, I developed an eating disorder because I felt that if I lost weight, I would be accepted. I developed first anorexia and then bulimia. Yes, guys do get eating disorders. 30% of all those with eating disorders are men. And two, I discovered that I could drink alcohol to mute those feelings of shame and being unloved. And before I knew it, at 21 years old at Penn State University, I was an alcoholic. And then I did graduate from Penn State, and I decided I was going to go on to Pitt Law School. Well, why did I decide to go to law school? Well, I decided to go to Pitt Law not because I wanted to be Clarence Darrow, not because I wanted to change the world, not because I wanted to make a lot of money. I decided I was going to go because I could spend 3 more years hiding and not having to show this ugly Brian, this Brian who felt unloved, to the real world. I could engage in the behaviors I did at Penn State, which was drinking, binging and purging. I was bulimic, and isolating. as an alcoholic. To show you how it was, I remember when I was at Penn State, I walked into a hamburger joint one day, and this was my one moment of self-awareness as a young man at Penn State University about addiction. I walk in, and there's this rack of pamphlets, and it is the Alcoholics Anonymous 20 questions, if anyone's ever seen those. And so answer this many of these 20 questions, yes, and you might be an alcoholic. Well, do you black out? Yes. Do you not go to class? Yes. Blah, blah, yes, yes, yes. Well, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just a college student. Crumple up the pamphlet, throw it in the garbage bin. 2 points. That was as close as I ever came to self-awareness. So I go on to Pitt Law as an alcoholic and bulimic. And as you might imagine, I was not a very good student at Pitt Law because I spent more time just trying to survive day to day than I did trying to be a good student. And it was a place I really didn't feel accepted or want to be in the first place. I did not go to law school for the right reasons. And so I graduated from Pitt Law by the skin of my teeth. As a matter of fact, I have reoccurring nightmares to this day about the dean of the law school at that time, Mark Nordenberg, during graduations when I go to take my diploma, kind of pulling it back from me and going, psych, you really didn't graduate. I have reoccurring nightmares about that to this day, about not graduating from Pitt Law. You know, I hear that's common, these law school reoccurring nightmares. That's mine, about not graduating. And I probably shouldn't have graduated. I never went to class. I drank. I was hungover. I went just enough time so nobody was forced to say, hey, we're not going to graduate you. As a matter of fact, I remember that for one of my classes, I showed up so few times that it was estates and trust, that the estates and trust professors went to the registrar, and as you know, it's anonymous grading, and said, I don't know what Cuban got, but drop him one letter grade because he didn't show up to class. That was my life at Pitt Law. And this was 1983 to 1986. Back then, we do not have the mental health awareness, the mental health resources, the resources of addiction awareness that we have today. Today, we have law schools, who, for the most part, understand, although a lot of them may not be actively courting their students to empower them to recover, there is a basic level of understanding that we have to connect with the services of the larger university if we're part of that. If we're a standalone school, we have to have resources. But I question whether we're doing enough in law school. How many law students even know that they can use their lawyer's assistance program if they're struggling? How many law students know, what resources are available in the larger university if they're part of that? So there's still a lot of work to do, but there are some good people doing that. There's David Jaffe at the American University School of Law, who authored a very seminal study on law students and mental health issues. And so we're doing a lot more. So I did graduate from Pitt, and I decided that I was going to move on from Pittsburgh. I was not happy there. It was a reminder of a difficult relationship with my mother. It was a reminder of not accomplishing anything as I saw all my law student peers doing big law, getting job offers. There weren't many interviews, as you might imagine, on the board for me at Pitt Law. So I decided I was going to move to Dallas, Texas. And I moved to Dallas, Texas because my two brothers had already lived there, Mark and Jeff. They had moved to Dallas. And I thought that I could move in with them and that would fix me. Their love would fix me. I would, get my life straight. I would get a job. So I took the Pennsylvania bar. Before even finding out if I passed, I packed up and I left the Greyhound bus to Dallas. Moving to Dallas was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Poof! This was 1986. My brothers were young. Dallas was a party town. They were dating. They were trying to meet girls. They were going to the bar. So I fit right in. And then in 1987, I discovered something that absolutely changed my life for what seemed like the better at that time, but for the long-term worse as an addicted lawyer. And I truly became an addicted lawyer. In the bathroom of a hotel in Dallas, Texas in 1987, I discovered cocaine. A friend of mine offered it to me in the went down to the bathroom, did a line, and for 15 seconds to 20 seconds of that high, the entire world was right. I looked in that mirror and I no longer saw a fat pig. I saw a Brian that was loved. I saw a Brian that all the girls were going to love. I saw a Brian who was accepted. I saw a Brian who was popular. That line of cocaine made me everything that I felt I was not, and erased my life for the previous 26 years. In that bathroom, in that hotel in Dallas, Texas in 1987, I instantly became a cocaine addict. Anyone who tells you you cannot become an addict from the first time, from the first hit, from the first drink is wrong. They should come talk to me. I instantly became a cocaine addict in that bathroom. Before I knew it, I was doing cocaine in the bathroom of my law firm that I was of counsel. I was doing cocaine to work up the nerve to walk into a courtroom. I hated being in court. It terrified me because I was afraid of rejection. But I was doing what I had to do, taking cases I shouldn't have, ambulance chasing, whatever I needed to do, because I had no confidence in myself, and cocaine made me feel like I had confidence. So instead of preparing for court, instead of preparing for a case, I was out drinking. I was out doing lines. I was doing cocaine just to wake up, to get to the law firm. And this is how I lived my life as a lawyer. I never thought about recovery. I never thought about how it was affecting my practice. I never thought about how it was affecting my clients. And let me tell you something. It was the absolute luck of the draw that I never had a grievance filed against me, because I did things that certainly deserved having a grievance filed. I walked the line on barratry because it was all about getting money for my high. I missed hearings, I missed deadlines, and I was always able to find a workaround. And it was just amazing that I was able to not have my license suspended, that I was not disbarred. And this is, of course, is not an unusual story in addiction. It is not an unusual story with solo practitioners, with people in big law, wherever you are. I mean, we can't erase our past, and everyone who may be susceptible to addiction, whether it's triggered because of things that went on in our past that we haven't dealt with, or the stress of the present, the social isolation, the things we have to deal with as a solo in big law, the hours. It's all there because we're all just human. And that is how I live my life as an addict, as a lawyer. It's funny, I remember I was so desperate for money because I was spending every dime I had, and I had some good years as a lawyer. I was spending every dime I had on alcohol and drugs, that I basically became the Paul Newman, if you remember in the verdict, circling the names on the in the death notices, where I not quite like that, but I would go down to chiropractors' offices and sit there and wait for the chiropractor to come out and say, "Hey, this is our lawyer. You want to use him?" And I had my briefcase there with the contracts. I mean, it was a different kind of ambulance chasing, but these were the things that I resorted to because I was spending every dime I had on drugs and alcohol. It finally all came to a head one day when I became so hopeless that I would never get better, that I would never be the lawyer I expected myself to be, that I would never be the person that was respected, that was loved. I just saw only a black hole in my future, and I decided I was going to take my own life. And that was in July of 2005. And I was very lucky because my brothers came in to my house. I had a weapon on my nightstand, and I was taken down to a psychiatric facility. And it was my first of 2 trips to a psychiatric facility. It was a brief moment of clarity, but it was not one that pushed me into my recovery tipping point. And so I go to the psychiatric facility and I refused to go into treatment. My brothers were willing to pay for my treatment. I refused to do that. My only thought was I didn't want to be discovered. I didn't want people to know I was an addict. I wanted them to mind their own business to the extent I thought I was an addict at that time. So they take me back home and we did what I call basically the Cuban rehab. They say spend two weeks in your house, stay home, and they took my car keys and you'll be all better. My family is no different than anyone else. We didn't really understand recovery. We didn't understand the gray area between enablement, love, and recovery. So they decided if I stayed home for a couple of weeks, everything would be good. As anyone who has dealt with addiction knows, that's not enough for recovery, just trying to sober up on your own for 2 weeks. And that wasn't enough for me. One, my first thought was as we drove home, no problem, my drug dealer delivers. And 2, as soon as they left, I took a cab down to the car dealership and got another set of keys. They weren't going to tell me what to do. And before you knew it, I was back out doing drugs, doing blow, drinking, but only this time distancing myself from everyone who loved me so history didn't repeat itself. Not history in terms of addiction, but so they didn't interfere with my life again. I distanced myself. My law practice crumbled. I was no longer making money. I was going into my office where I was of counsel at this plaintiff's firm, doing cocaine in the bathroom and just sitting there in a stupor all day. And this was really the beginning of the end for me in terms of what was going on in my life in terms of addiction. And so 3 failed marriages because of addiction. And I finally, one night in 2006, I met someone and she didn't know about my problems. And so we began dating. She moved in with me. And I was an expert at hiding my addiction and my drinking, my drugs, as addicts often are, right? We become an expert at hiding them from our wives, from our family, from our partners, from colleagues, from associates, from our paralegal. We do the things we need to do to make sure that we preserve our world that we have created. And of course, eventually those worlds come colliding together, and eventually we miss one too many deadlines. Eventually a judge says something or our partner says something. We get grieved and we're up before the bar. And then we have to face the reality of addiction. My reality was April 6, 2007, now my wife, at that time my girlfriend, yes, she stuck with me and we ended up getting married all these years later. She had gone away for the weekend to Houston to visit her family. Before the next thing I knew, it was April 8th, 2 days later, she's staring down at my bed. I had had a 2-day drug and alcohol-induced blackout. So, and that's her staring over there in a little picture there in this thing with the little scissors there for some humor. But so we go back to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility. She moves out. And I'm standing in the parking lot in Green Oaks, and I'm thinking a couple things to myself. One, there's not going to be a 3rd trip to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility because I'll be dead. And 2, I had come to the point where I really was going to lose my family. That this was it, that the gray area between love, enablement, and recovery had come crashing together. And of course I thought that Amanda, my girlfriend then, was going to leave me. She stood by me actually, and we ended up getting married just a couple months ago in October. And so I realized that I couldn't lose my family. Our father growing up used to say to Mark and Jeff and I, he'd say, Mark, Jeff, Brian, or Brian, Jeff, Mark, it is when you have multiple siblings, the parents always get it wrong. He'd say, wives may come and go. And well, we hope they don't. For me, they certainly had. Girlfriends may come and go, but when push comes to shove, all you have is each other. So no matter where you go in life, no matter what you do, you always pick up that phone. You always tell the other sibling you love him. You make sure you were there for the other sibling. And I thought about that. And I thought about that gift he had given us, that kind of bond of brothers. And I couldn't lose that. I couldn't give that up. I couldn't lose my family. And if you want to know how that bond stuck and how that gift he gave us of brotherhood and family stuck, this day, all these miles away from Pittsburgh where we grew up, decades later, my two brothers and I and my father all live within walking distance of each other. That wasn't just by accident. That was the gift that he gave us, a family staying close. So that is how I recovered. And so the next day, I walk into my psychiatrist's office, who I've been lying to. Well, why would you lie to your psychiatrist? Well, there's a saying, shame knows no hourly rate, right? If you're not in a comfortable position, you don't feel comfortable, you're not in a position to be vulnerable, you don't feel like you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable, you lie and you hide things. And this is important when it comes to the legal profession, because what are we afraid of when it comes to addiction and when we have mental health issues, we have family issues? What do they teach us not to be, from starting from law school, going into court? We teach ourselves not to be vulnerable. We teach ourselves that it is a weakness to be vulnerable, to open up, to allow ourselves to be helped, because that is something that will be used against us. That is one of the biggest problems, in my experience in talking to other lawyers, we face as a barrier to recovery, the ability to be vulnerable and allow ourselves to be vulnerable. The ability to, and we're going to get to that, talk even to our inner child, and we'll talk about that. And so I finally opened up to my psychiatrist, and he said, Brian, well, there's a problem here. I said, what? We have a lot of things to work on, but you're a freaking drug addict and an alcoholic. We can't work on things until you get sober. Well, what do you want me to do? I would still refuse to go to residential treatment, because, you know why I don't want to go to residential treatment? I'm a lawyer. Lawyers don't go to residential treatment. I have one case left, my busy law practice. That one client left needs me. You know, that is the world I created, that my one client needed me, the one case I have left. That is why I could not get sober, in my mind. He said, Brian, you're not a lawyer anymore. You're an addict. You may have a law degree, but your identity as a lawyer is long gone. Wow. Kind of a profound moment at that time. Like, okay, what do you want me to do? Well, there's a 12-step right next door. Go over there. Just leave now and go right next door. I'm not going to 12-step. I see them out front. Those are sterno bums. Those are homeless people. They're smoking. There are no lawyers in 12-step. Of course, when I finally walked in there, half the people when there were lawyers, and I knew half of them, right? But at that moment, I was like, no, I'm a lawyer. There are no lawyers in 12-step. But I knew I had to do something to satisfy my family, to satisfy my psychiatrist. So I went over to 12-step, and that was April 8th, 2007. And since April 8th, 2007, I have not had a drink. I have not done cocaine. So I've been in recovery since then. I'll have 10 years coming April, and I'm pretty sure I'll make it one day at a time. That is how I recovered. So here's a poll. Do you know any attorney struggling with alcohol or drug use? The choices are yes, no, not sure.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So everyone has a poll in front of them now. If you can please go ahead and select one of those, and I'll just give you a few more seconds until the majority has voted, which it looks like most people have voted. So I'll close the polls and launch the results. All right. Results are in.
46% yes.
Yeah, 46% yes, exactly. 20% no, and 34% not sure. Is that higher than you expected to see, or is that about what you expected?
I have a follow-up question to that. That's not part of the poll, but I'm going to ask it. How many of you are keeping it to yourselves? How many of you have said something to someone within the profession? How many of you don't know what to do? Mm-hmm. So this is a common dilemma. So you can answer that question to yourself.
Great.
And here is the ABA Betty Ford Hazelden study that will give you some context for what I'm talking about. For those who haven't read it, it came out in February of last year. It is a groundbreaking study done by a friend of mine, Patrick Krill, Esquire. He was kind enough to allow me to use these stats from his study. Thank you, Patrick, if you're listening. And so the last study before that was in 1990. And here's what we found out of the 12,825 licensed employed attorneys and judges. We break out fairly evenly in terms of male and female, and then we have transgender, the males with a slight edge. And so you can see the stats there out of 12,825 lawyers. And then we can see, and this is very significant, the years in the field. Look at how that breaks up. 0 to 10 years, 34%, 34.8%. Why is that significant? Because this is a significant change from the last study done in 1990, where the majority of lawyers struggling were my age now. We're going into the baby boom. I'm a baby boomer. The older lawyers. Now we have the 0 to 10 lawyers who are struggling, the 0 to 10 lawyers. Where do you fall in that if you're listening? We have the millennials. So there is a significant jump from 11 to 20 to 0 to 10. Our younger lawyers are struggling, and this is significant because within the profession and coming out of law school into the profession, what are these networking events targeting? What are the culture within the firm targeting? It's the younger lawyers. The younger lawyers tend to be in a more social place in life. So that is a significant correlation today. And you can see private firms 40%, solo practitioner, private practice 21%. That actually surprised me because at least in my anecdotal experience, I talked to more who were in solo practitioner, private practice who are having issues. And that, again, that's just anecdotes. Anecdotes are not evidence. It just happens to be what I deal with, and the people who approach me, the people who email me, the people who ask me for advice tend to be more on the private practitioner side. So here are some interesting stats too from the study. 22.6% felt the use of alcohol or substance was a problem sometime during their lives, and that makes perfect sense to me because we have the different groups here. We have the groups of the law students to the lawyers, law students, addicted law students becoming addicted lawyers. Nothing's changed, right? And only that it's going to get worse. As we know, it's going to get worse if you don't get help. We have the law students who may not have had a problem, but may have been susceptible to environmental triggers, moving into a stress of a private practice, a big law, of a mid-sized, and the stress triggers them into something. So we have the private practice, the small firms, where social isolation, which is a huge issue upon lawyers. You're putting in a lot of hours. You're isolating from family. You're isolating from friends. That can be a major trigger. So if you look at these stats, figure out where you fit or figure out where that person who is struggling fits. Because you see 14.2 reported problematic use started law school, 27.6 problematic use prior to law school. That's where I fit. My issues occurred prior to law school. 43.7 reported problematic use started within the first 15 years. Again, the younger lawyers. Very important. How likely would you be to utilize your state's lawyers assistance program?
Great. Second poll, everyone. So if you can please make your selection there from either very likely, somewhat, or not a chance. So go ahead and make your selection on your poll, and I'll share the results with everyone in just a moment. All right, looks like everyone's voted. Here goes. All right, results are in. How likely would you be to utilize your state's lawyers assistance program? 23% very likely, 53% somewhat, and 24% said not a chance.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I want to give you another anecdote from maybe 4 months ago when I spoke at the Dallas Bar Association event, a lunchtime event. I talked about the lawyer's assistance program. A lot of them didn't even know it existed. I should have asked that as a poll question. Did you even know you could use it? Do you even know that you have a lawyer's assistance program that you can use if you're struggling? And it was a male lawyer, and he came up to me privately and he said, like the 24% here, not a freaking chance. And I said, why not? He goes, it's an arm of the state bar. It's not confidential. Whatever I tell them is going to get out. It's either going to get out to the state bar and I'm going to end up before the state bar. It's going to get out to my colleagues. It's going to get out to my clients. It's not confidential. I know it's not confidential. Okay. How do you know that? I heard it from a guy. I heard it from another lawyer. Well, how does he know that? Well, I think someone told him. So do you have any even anecdotal experience of somebody going to a lawyer's assistance program and having that information get out, either that it was used against them by the state bar? And of course, there's no way to ever prove that because the proceedings are private and they're confidential. But to a client, to the firm, no, I don't. So we have these educated, smart lawyers, trial lawyers, lawyers who write briefs, doing whatever, who would never walk into court with that argument telling me they know that it's not confidential because a guy told a guy who told a guy. So that is the stigma that we're dealing with here. That is the stigma of addiction. And we're going to go back from that slide because I don't want to get off the stigma of addiction yet. And so this is what we're faced with in the profession. We're faced with, one, the stigma of addiction in itself, of feeling ashamed, feeling weak, I see this all the time, not just with lawyers. This is a stigma, that permeates the issue of it being a choice. Addiction is a choice. Addiction is weak. And I should have asked that question too. How many of you believe addiction is a choice? That would be interesting. So this is the fear that I see in lawyers when they don't want to utilize the lawyer's assistance program. If they're in a firm, they don't even want to utilize their employee's assistance program because they don't feel it's confidential, when there is no evidence to support that. Here's another question I'd like to ask. Do you believe there's a drinking culture in the legal profession?
Great question. Okay, this is our last poll, everybody. So if you could please select one of the following: definitely, somewhat, not at all, or not sure. All right, everyone's quick to the polls, so I'm going to wrap this up. All right, and results are in. So 70% said yes, they believe there is a drinking culture in the legal profession. 24% said somewhat, 1% not at all, and 5% are just not sure.
That result comports with what people tell me privately. And again, whether we believe there is a drinking culture within the profession is always going to be shaped by our life experiences. Okay, so somebody who has one experience may look at it differently. So I totally get that. Again, anecdotally, for people who know me, I'm very active on Twitter. I'm very active in tweeting about what's going on within the profession, what's going on in addiction in general, within the addiction advocacy world. And so I pay attention to what state bars are putting out there. I pay attention to what law firms are putting out there. The last two things I've seen on Twitter, and I'm not going to call anyone out here, because I mentioned it to them privately. One, a networking event, a young lawyers networking event by the state bar that had a wine tasting afterwards. And this is something I see all the time. There's nothing wrong with wine tastings. I mean, people are wine. Just because you like wine doesn't mean you're an alcoholic, okay? But my eyes rolled a little bit when I saw that because, again, we're in a time where younger lawyers are at the highest risk for problematic drinking, and we feel the need to apply them to events with alcohol. I saw another one, the same thing, and it was a substance abuse event. and it was one that I think Above the Law even noted too, a substance use event that had an alcohol-related event afterwards. Come on. I mean, is this the culture? Well, it's anecdotal, but we certainly see a need to, at least anecdotally, to bring young lawyers to events by promising alcohol. In terms of law firm functions, I mean, what was your last Christmas party? What did they offer? Did they offer a equal selection of non-alcoholic drinks? If they offered alcoholic eggnog during the holiday season, did they offer non-alcoholic eggnog? Do you feel that you have to attend these events where it's alcohol oriented, or you will be stigmatized? People will notice. You have to do it to meet clients. You have to do it to show the partners, the associates, that you're part of the game. Does this add up to a drinking culture? Again, I believe it does, but your personal experience is going to shape how you feel about that. Changing that culture. How do we change that culture? There are two cultures that need to be changed. One, the culture of the stigma. We have to change the culture of fear. And this is truly, in my opinion, a culture of fear within the profession, that if we seek help, we will be stigmatized, ostracized, disbarred. When I speak to lawyers, when I speak to law students, the conversation almost invariably goes like this. Okay, I'm struggling. This is going on in my personal life. Alcohol is causing these problems. I'm missing deadlines. I'm doing this. I'm hiding my mail so people won't know that I'm missing deadlines. But I don't want to tell anyone. Why? I can fix this. I can think my way out of this. We're a profession of thinkers, right? I can get through this. I can make it work. Well, let's take a step back. You're missing deadlines. You're getting drunk. Your marriage is on the rocks. How are you making it work so far? And what these lawyers and what these law students, their grades are suffering, and what they lose sight of and what they never want to talk about is they get caught up in the short-term consequences versus the long-term tragedy of what will inevitably happen if they don't take it up now. It is inevitable. You are going to end up before the bar. It is inevitable that your grades will suffer and you may end up out of law school. This is not time. We know this, okay? Very few people who are addicts, alcoholics, make it through life with no consequences. And the longer we go without treatment, the harsher the consequences tend to get. There's a saying within 12-step, and so if you don't get help, you end up, either in jail, into psychiatric ward, or underground. This is no different. And lawyers would rather try to think themselves out of the problem than see that they're going to be before the state bar. Your job could be terminated if they don't deal with it now. How do we change that culture of fear? It's not an easy question. And it is a burden that law firms, that the lawyers' assistance programs have to take on, in getting more aggressive in trickling down information. I mean, law firms, medium to big, need to have the lawyers' assistance programs coming in. We need to have regular meetings and regular, in-house seminars about what's available. That doesn't mean we have to become treatment clinics, but the first step in changing culture is providing information and giving the people the ability to absorb that information, because information is often what can be the tipping point in someone saying, I'm going to give that a try. That when I share my story, that's information. I get emails all the time. That was the tipping point for someone saying, okay, I'm going to get help. How can I convince you that it's not going to get out? I can't. Okay, but isn't there a point where you have to trust the process? Because if you don't trust the process, once you're before the bar, trusting the process is no longer an issue. You have lost the ability to control your destiny. Better to deal with what's in front of you now and control it. Better to take charge of your recovery. Addiction is not a choice. Recovery is a choice. Okay, and yes, maybe there's short-term consequences, but short-term consequences are not the same as what happens down the road. Short-term consequences, you can rebuild. You can still have a career as a lawyer. And maybe you decide, for me, I decided I didn't want to have a career as a lawyer. But you can't make these choices unless you have a clear head and get into long-term recovery. And again, once that grievance is filed and you're before the bar, you look back and say, I could have dealt with it then, and now it's too late. The bar's making your decision for you. And that is why we have to deal with the fear and stigma now. We're all worried about risking the infamy within the firm, within the bar, within being on the front page of, the local newspaper. I thank goodness that I went through all this before YouTube and have my name on the front page of the Dallas Morning News. I could just see it because I'm always referred to as Mark Cuban's brother. Mark Cuban's brother busted DWI. I'm glad I spent my night in jail, before all of this. Yes, I've been to jail, and I recovered from it. It was not fun, but I have recovered. I have stepped into recovery. We have to allow ourselves as lawyers to being vulnerable. Again, addiction is not a choice. When we start telling ourselves that addiction is a choice, I am weak, that is when we start hiding. That is when we start telling ourselves, I'm not going to get help. I'll just think my way through this. I'll bluff my way through this. It is the hardest thing for a lawyer to do, but being vulnerable is so important. I write letters to my inner child. I talk to my inner child. I'll be sexist here. The female lawyers are going, yes, I get that. The male lawyers are crossing their arms saying, oh, give me a break, inner child. But I think it's great. I think everyone should talk to their inner child. It's part of being vulnerable. I do it all the time. That's just one tool. Okay? But what it comes down to is allowing yourself to love, be loved, and accept help. We have to get to that place in order to take that first step in recovery. How do you do that? How we do that is going to depend on who you are, how you developed as a person, what your life story entails. Our life story is different, your personal situation, your current situation as a lawyer. But let me tell you something. People want to help. The LAP wants to help. Your family probably wants to help. Open yourself up for one moment, just one moment, to your LAP, to your family, to another associate, and risk being vulnerable, because recovery is part of that vulnerability. And we don't like to say it to ourselves, we don't like to admit it to ourselves, but it is a crucial tool of recovery, and it is the most counterintuitive things for us to do as lawyers. And for getting help, there are resources out there. I talk about it all the time. Lawyers' assistance programs, I stress it. They want you to know it. They are confidential. Yes, they are. No matter how much you want to tell yourself they're not, in order for you not to have to take that first step, and I totally get that. I do. It is easier. They are there, and they are confidential. They're not going to rat on you to the state bar, to the disciplinary board. We have 12-step out there. 12-step isn't for everyone, okay? But it's out there, and we know it's anonymous. If you're not into the whole 12-step thing, we have Smart Recovery. Smart Recovery is Smart Recovery doesn't have that quote-unquote spiritual aspect. If you're not into the 12-step, we have Celebrate Recovery. If you are religious and you believe that is an important part of your recovery. The point being, there are all these tools out there to help you take that first step. And you don't have to, in whatever order you decide to take them in, just take it. That is all you have to do, is just take it. And it's there. And don't try to think yourself through it. Allow yourself to be helped. And if you want to contact me, I talk to lawyers and law students all the time. There's my email address there. You can reach out to me on Twitter, and that's it.
Okay, awesome. Brian, that was really an incredible presentation. Thank you. We will get into questions, but for those of you who have to leave us now, please take note of 3 things. When you close your webinar today, a quick 5-question survey will pop up. All it takes is 30 seconds to answer these questions, and then you're entered to win that Apple gift card. If you are a Florida Bar member, note CLE course 2490R to self-report your CLE. And also, you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the blog where you'll find these slides, the recording, and the gift card winner. We'll also record, Brian, those links that you just had a couple slides back. We'll include those in the follow-up email too for everybody. And now I will move on to some of these questions. First question, Brian, did your partners realize that you were an addict? How did they deal with the addiction and deal with you?
Yes, well, I was of counsel, so they were not, I wouldn't say my partners, but yes, the very last place that I was of counsel, the named partner did say something, and he did he did reach out to help me, but he never mentioned the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. He never mentioned the state, what was available. I don't think he knew what was available, but he did reach out as a person and as a friend and try to help me. But he did not reach out with resources, and I don't think he knew what resources were available. And I talk to lawyers all the time that have no idea that lawyers assistance programs exist.
Great. Thank you for that. Next question. Are more lawyers likely to have problems with alcohol because it's a legal drug rather than having problems with illegal drugs such as cocaine?
That's a great question. And when the study came out, the ABA HAZELDEN study came out, I asked almost that exact question of Patrick Krill. And here was the problem with that in the study. There wasn't a significant enough response rate to come to any conclusion. And and of course there's no way to know, but what we surmise is that lawyers, even on an anonymous study, lawyers are too afraid of being outed and it getting out to, and it's so stigmatized that they don't want to admit to illicit drug use. And the circles I ran in, I would have guessed every lawyer I knew was doing blow. Okay. But of course, that's anecdotal, and that's just the circles I ran in because that's what I choose to hang around, lawyers and other people who are doing cocaine. But I think within the culture, it's not a culture of cocaine, although I do think we have a more statistically significant number of lawyers doing illicit drugs, whether it's cocaine or whatever else. That's just my personal drug. And there are lawyers who do cocaine. There are lawyers who do meth. There are lawyers who do heroin. We're in the middle of a heroin epidemic. I know lawyers who are struggling with heroin. But I think because events don't wrap around those drugs, you are certainly going to see more lawyers with drinking issues. Life doesn't tend, we are going to see more lawyers with drinking issues, and that's, in my opinion, is why.
Yeah, that was a great question. Okay, next question. What has worked for you in terms of relieving stress or coping with difficult situations that may have previously led you to use?
That's a great question. I use a few things. I use one, I'm a big, if you know what spinning is, flywheel and soul cycle, that is a big stress relief to me. I view exercise as a big stress release. I always have to be careful with that because I'm also in recovery from an eating disorder, so it doesn't go into compulsive exercise, and my wife tries to keep me in check with that, although she's not always successful. Mindfulness is a big thing for me, and for those who know Gina Chow, she talks about that, not in terms of meditation, but in terms of being present in my recovery, in terms of, for me, mindfulness may mean taking a 30-minute shower and just thinking about my life and thinking about what I've done today, what's going on. So mindfulness is important, and mindfulness is something that I use in my eating disorder recovery, so I've managed to translate that to my addiction recovery. And there are all kinds of versions of mindfulness: meditation, yoga, different things. I am a true advocate of mindfulness, but you have to decide what that means to you. But to me, it means being present in my recovery, being able to step outside myself and say, is he doing what he needs to do to stay balanced, if that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm currently in 12-step. I currently in 12-step. For me, 12-step's important, and I go to meetings, and that's important to me because I never want to get too comfortable in my recovery. I like to hear stories. I like to be reminded where I came from. And that doesn't mean that I engage in, I think looking back at where I've been is very important in moving forward. Not because I look back, and I just wrote about this on Above the Law the other day, engaging in what I call revisionist recovery. I never look back and say, well, I've lost all these years to my life, as people who are in recovery go into recovery later, and like I did, who tend to do early on, regret like that, or say if I'd done this differently or that different, things would be different. That's revisionist recovery, and that is not helpful. I constantly reflect back, though, in the fluid nature of my life that brought me where I am today, and try to use that to shape how I move forward.
Great. Well, Brian, thank you so much. I can't explain how much I appreciate your presentation today. And rather than getting a lot of questions, we got a lot of comments saying outstanding presentation and that they're thankful for this. So wanted to pass that on to you. And we are out of time. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. There are a lot of other questions still out there, so we may follow up with a MyCase blog post on this. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.